Paul Koseth is with the Kansas DOT. He's been there 12 years. He's currently the bridge management engineer. He's been in design, bridge inspection, and bridge maintenance plans. With that, I'd like you to welcome Paul.
After watching that, I'm very envious of some of the things that Eric was saying, that they have a consistent revenue stream plus the crews to do it. So that's something we would like to be able to do too, but fortunately, like Don said, it's a little bit of a different story for us. So we share in the sentiment that he had, that we believe in him, though. We really think it's a good thing to do. If we could set aside some money to do a certain number of bridges each year, that would be great. We have numerous candidates for them, and we would wish we could apply more. So what I'm going to go over is kind of our preservation goals at Kansas, and kind of some of our philosophies that we've developed, and then kind of an overview of our funding, some statistics and trends of the overlays that we've placed. Eric kind of showed some on the KTA side. We'll show you some from the state side, and then a few of the problems that we've seen on the state system on some of the polymers that we've placed, and then some of the things that Eric touched on with surface preparation and protection, some photos of the application of the overlay, and then I'll address some questions if we have any. So from our preservation goal, this chart, I took it from this preservation guide, the FHW preservation guide, but I think it really kind of shows a flow of what can be done, what your options are for, potential options are for bridges. So obviously the replacements in red and the preservations in green, so the color scheme is good there too, but you've got a flow there where if you can stay on the top side of that, you're money ahead, because you can prevent some of the problems. Obviously you don't have to get to the replacement. And to try and focus that preservation topic to one, we really believe that polymer overlays are the definition of preservation. You've got a product and you're applying something to it to try and preserve it over time and to keep its current condition, and we feel that polymer overlays are a good example of that. And to also reflect, just from a funding situation, this is on the state system. You can see on the far left is year 2000. That's we've had basically back to three highway transportation programs that have been back to back, early 90s to 2000s to 2009, 2010, and then one that just started in May, an $8 billion program that started in May of 2010. So you see the dip there. The last gap in funding that we've had was in late 2009, early 2010, before the legislature passed the bill. So you can see the big dip in, but we've had the backing, the funding that's been there for the last 15 years or so, and you can see the performance. I mean, we went from percent of bridges in good condition from 77% to consistently over our goal of 85%, and it's been able to plateau. I mean, obviously, to be able to get over the hump a little bit, it takes a lot of funding, but then once you can maintain that funding, you can keep your system at a certain goal, at a certain level. And it's hard to keep that trend going upward. Once you get to a certain plateau, we kind of plateau out a little bit, and you need a lot of funding to keep going on that positive trend. But if you can get that level of funding to maintain things, that's really the key. And we're on a little bit of a downturn. It's kind of contradictory because the 2015 funding shows a kind of a spike, but that's just kind of how the numbers fall. If I were to come back in a couple of years and show you this slide, it'd be considerably different, because we are going to be on a very, very much a downward trend, similar to the 2007 to 2010 gap there. That little range is about what it's going to look like for the next 3 to 4 years. So we're anticipating a downward trend in our percent in good bridges as well. This is just the bridge maintenance portion of that. That was bridge replacement as well. This is just the maintenance, and you can see we've had fairly consistent funding other than that 2009-2010 gap. But overall, the funding trends have been good, and as I said, this will look a little different. Obviously, we don't have the numbers for next year, but as a perspective view of this, so we have 28 million or so that we had in 2015 overall for bridge maintenance, and 16 million of that was cut for next year. and we don't know what our status will be for fiscal year 17. So you can see basically it was cut in half, if not more. So, and really some of that money was already kind of programmed for culvert replacements and things. So we really typically deal in the 17 to 21 million dollar range each year for our real maintenance, and all of that was cut essentially. So for the next few years, we're shifting dollars to try and move projects around to try and balance out some of that deficit. Over time, as Eric showed, how many polymer overlays we've placed over the years, similar to the KTA trend, we started noticing a benefit from it. We started seeing it as something we could do fairly quickly, fairly cheaply, and really get best bang for our buck. So we started really putting an investment into it. And the numbers increased over the years, as you can see, with a spike in 2014 and 2012. We had quite a few that we did those 2 years. And again, the number is going to trend downwards. So if I go back to this, the number is going to trend downwards again. We did 12 in 2015. In 16 and 17, we'll be 5 or less, probably. So if not less than that. So we're really not, we really have found that we don't have the funding to do it much anymore. So. In correlating to that, the number of bridges you do, also the square feet of polymers placed that we do, we also had an upward trend in that as well. So Calvin Reed gave this presentation similar to this a few years ago, and Tom Donnelly had asked for us to kind of do a follow-up on it to contrast the KTAs as well. And you can see that trend when he gave the presentation a couple years ago. That trend was continuing upwards. It's going downwards now, and as I said, next year it'll be even smaller. So. Yeah, correlating to that, the money spent is a direct correlation to the square feet placed, and that's about how many millions of dollars we've invested in the Polymer Overlay program over the years. The reason for that investment was the downward trend in bid prices that we saw. In Eric's presentation, he was saying somewhere around $22 per square yard and $29 with contract work. That included traffic control mobilization. This does not. This is just our straight bid cost. So add some, excess dollars for the traffic control. But the traffic control is fairly cheap because we do look like you guys use cones on yours, and we typically do ours too. With the concrete safety barrier, they get a little bit more expensive on the traffic control side. But mobilization, again, is very small too because there's not much to mobilize. So although these don't include those costs, they're not much higher. So with that downward trend, we started putting more into it because the cheaper it got, the more we did, the cheaper it got. So it was a sustaining program. And this kind of summarizes those. So as the orange graph shows, that's the average bid cost. And then all the rest of those things started going up as that went down. And it's somewhat plateaued, but we took advantage of the high prices, or I mean of the low costs, and took advantage of placing more of them. Overall, we have around 7% of our structures in the state that have polymer overlays on them. If you excluded structures under fill, like culvert, box culvert, multi-barrel box culverts, that number would be higher. But right now we've had an upward trend on percentages of bridges that have had them. If you look at the graph, the metro areas. Here we've got Wichita down here, we've got Topeka here, and we've got Kansas City on the northeastern section, and those are clustered there. We have a lot of polymer overlays in our metro areas, and then the other trend that you see is on a lot of our interstates. We have them too. So we've kind of concentrated on them for the most part, on those areas for the most part. One example of kind of a bulk unit price, taking advantage of the low bid prices and kind of getting a bulk rate, was something we did in Wichita on K96. It's in the northeast section of Wichita, and it was a July letting in 2013. And all the bridges in that stretch were around 20 years old. They were all built in the years from 1992 to 1994. And we produce lists that have candidates for polymer overlays, and then we can populate them with Google Fusion Maps to try and see where they're at. And there was a big cluster of candidates in this area, so we decided to take advantage of it, see what we could do, see what costs we would get, and we got down to about $3.33 per square foot or $30 per square yard. So it was a pretty low bid, but we had a lot of bridges in there. There's 26. We actually had 28 in the bid. One twin set was removed because there was a conflict with the city widening bridge. So we tried to take advantage of nearly every interchange on that stretch of highway, and we had $704,000 and 211,000 square feet. So it was a big project. It was a lengthy project, but again, it was low mobilization. Traffic control costs would be down because they're all right there. So trying to take advantage of grouping things together, we've really seen a good trend. If we can take advantage of, like, say, an eastbound route or a westbound route, we try and group those because that helps with the traffic control. If bridges are close together and they can be kind of enveloped in the same traffic control, we see a good benefit from that too. Our specs have evolved over the years. We've typically always done the multi-layer overlay. Eric was touching on the single layer only. We've done, for fresh applications, we've done the multi-layer for most of our projects, and that might be the difference in cost a little bit that we're seeing there, but you can go to the site and look at the specifics of each spec. The multi-layer spec's been out there and it's changed somewhat. The new spec, the polymer concrete overlay repair spec, has been recently developed in the last few years, and I'll get into that in a little bit. The note at the bottom was that we had a kind of some correspondence that was sent around that Maryland was inquiring about the warranty. We don't include a warranty in either of those specs at all. You'll see some of the problems that we have. We kind of wish we did, but we don't include anything on that. So again, here's just the multi-layer spec, and we have some weather limitations. We used to have some dates that were in there. That's kind of been dropped out. Now it's more just temperature driven. We've seen some problems when we violate the spec as far as temperature considerations are concerned, or too early in the year or too late in the year. But if you can hit that sweet spot in the late spring to early fall, then we see good results from that. This is the polymer overlay repair spec that's been recently developed. There are two bid items, one for the repair of areas, and then the other one's for a single layer over the top. So what this would be is you'd have the multi-layer down on your deck, and you'd have some spots that are coming up. You would quantify the areas that need to be repaired, and then the quantity for a single layer over the top. So essentially it's going to get a third layer, but it's to try and seal up the patched areas, and then also just kind of seal up the old overlay itself. And it's relatively new. We've only had a few projects, and I'll get into that, but right now we've developed a 6 inches beyond the edges of the unsound, damaged, or delaminated polymer concrete. So we'll test that. We'll see if that needs to be expanded or maybe brought in a little bit, but right now that's where we're at. The few projects that we have some bid prices on are a couple here that are shown, and we got around $18 or somewhere between $18 and $29 per square yard. So not a great reduction in prices, but again, we have a small sample, and there's been some confusion because it's a new specs. The contractors don't necessarily understand what's being asked of them, but I think as we go further, we're going to see a downward trend of that pricing because we're going to be repairing quite a few overlays in the coming years. Some of the problems that we've been seeing have been some cracking or delaminated areas, some additional cracking, like spotting. You can see some of the reflective cracking coming up, and then some peeling problems. Some are worse than others. Some of these are attributed to some other things, but obviously having a seal with some gaps in the seal is not ideal. So we'd like to get back out there and repair those areas if we can. So when the funding becomes available, these will be some of the candidates that we'll go back out and repair. With that peeling, the surface prep is the key. So if the specs followed appropriately and some of the little intricate details of the surface prep are followed, I think we don't have many issues. But when some of those things are violated, I think that's when we see some of the issues. There's some methods that can be done to protect the surface, and one of these we see is that the trucks have a tarp that they drive over so that the wheels don't contaminate the surface. I don't know if every contractor does that or whatnot. I just asked for a sampling of some of the photos of field application, and this is what I saw in a few. And then, as Eric touched on, some of the contractors use some kind of fancy footwear to keep themselves off the deck, and they use either a set of spikes or bolts, I think is what you'd said. So that seems to look like it would be effective as far as keeping the surface relatively clean, but also keeping the workers not sludging around or slipping around on it too. And then here's just some photos of the epoxy application process, and the videos that Eric showed were a little bit more effective than this, but these are some still shots of the aggregate application. And with the multi-layer, as I touched on, if you want to get in with the spec, but we do this twice. So we come in, we put the epoxy down, we spread the aggregate, and then we come back and put the second layer over the top. And that's kind of a belts and suspenders approach, but it's also somewhat of a sacrificial wear, so that if there is some wear or some problems with it, you've got that second layer of protection, so you're really hoping to seal that. So, and with that, I'll open it up to any questions anyone has if we want to spend some time with that, or I'll be around if somebody wants to ask me questions later. So, yep.
A quick question for you, Paul. Sure. There are a couple of questions, actually. One is, what's the typical life that you see once you placed it? What's the first time you see all the peeling and all that stuff coming up in general? And two, the cost that you're talking about, $3.33 per square foot, does that include everything from preparation to getting out of there?
Well, yeah, like I said, that is just a bid item cost. It doesn't include the entire project related cost, because it's hard to isolate that cost because there's so many other things that go into a project. But the Wichita example is a really good one, because that's all the scope was. There was no additional scope on any of those bridges. It was just polymer overlays on every single one. And so there wasn't any hidden mobilization costs or anything like that. It was whatever it took to get that equipment and that crew out there is what they did. And then the traffic control is basically just cones. So there's not a lot of additional traffic cost in that. So that was the bid cost, but I think it was $700,000 for the total for that bid, and I think the overall project cost was just over $1 million. So there's a little bit extra in other things, but that's expected, I guess. So as far as life is concerned, as I said before, I mean, it can be, we would expect 15 to 20 years if we can get it. It just really comes down to the quality of the application and the attention to detail to make sure that surface is prepped appropriately and applied appropriately. So.
Okay, so the cost that you're talking about, that includes the MOT cost, the getting in there with the equipment, doing the work and getting out, all of that you're talking about in the Wichita case.
For that example, if you were to look at that project, the bid items would be the multi-layer polymer overlay, traffic control, mobilization, and maybe a couple incidentals with striping and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, yeah, that's essentially the $30 per square yard or $3.30 per square foot is essentially the whole thing, except more on the $4 per square foot, or maybe like $30, $31, $32 per square yard, something like that. So.
Hey, Paul, can you go back to one of your first slides there?
Sure. Which one?
Showing where you guys are at 86%, I think it is, right now. That's awesome. Great job. Just wanted to compliment you guys on that.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I said, when you get some highway programs and some funding and you apply the appropriate actions, that you can really get an increase in performance. If I showed the percent of bridges that are structurally deficient, are posted structures, functionally obsolete structures, all of them are on severe downward trends. We're at almost 1% structurally deficient bridges out of the 5,000 bridges in the state. So we've had a significant downturn from two to three consecutive highway programs. It may be different. Like I said, in a few years, this is going to be a different slide, but it's what it is now. So, yep. Go ahead, Bill.
So, Paul, from 2010 to 2015, when you had the dip in 2010 in funding, is what you potentially are seeing there is the actual lag time?
It's just carryover. What you're seeing, I mean, the funding from 2010, we passed the current T-Works program, which is a 10-year program. We passed that in May of 2010. So do you need me to repeat the question if it is?
Let me answer that.
Yep.
In 2008, we took a big dip in funding, like everybody did. I think that was about the China steel thing and all that. And they took their funds that same year, just like they did this year. And yeah, that you're seeing the fallout from that is what you're seeing.
Yeah, what they did is like essentially like whatever money was in 2010, we needed to make up for it in 2008. So they brought some money forward from the future, and the ARA funds were in that year too, 2007. So there's some things. I mean, you know, when you show a chart like this, you're pulling data, and there's so many little intricacies to it. But really, what this comes down to is that you had consecutive highway programs, and then there was this gap where there wasn't a highway program for about a year or so, 2 years. So, and then we had the T-Works bill passed in May of 2010. So. Then we started to see that upward trend again, and then now we've got our legislative group that's pulling some of that funding to pay for some tax revenue decreases, and so now you're going to see a downward trend in that. But we've got some committed dollars to it. It's just they took what they could, and what they could take was from preservation funding. So what isn't discussed, because it's really not this part of it, is for the conference that was before this, but they took, so our annual preservation budget's around $330 million. They took 16 from bridge preservation. They took $260 million from pavement preservation. So if we talked about pavement preservation and we looked at performance measures from pavement, it's going to be considerably worse. So, but again, I mean that's more of kind of what Kathy was talking about this morning. With Missouri and Kansas are kind of in a similar state as far as funding is concerned. So,
And make sure you understand that that's preservation funds.
Yep.
That's not major projects.
Right.
And
Yep.
any upgrades, that's just the preservation side. So they took our world
Yep.
right from under us. I mean,
And that's not really represented here. I mean, this is just what we have now. But like I said, if I showed this in a few years, it's going to be very much different. But we've done a really good job of maintaining the system, keeping it up, and I think we've done the appropriate actions that we did. I think the big upturn in like 2012 and 2014, when we had a lot of money invested in preservation, and you can see it. I mean, we really, one of the things that needs to be mentioned here is that as we had the highway programs, we addressed a lot of the major issues, the posted structures, the deficient structures. So then we started actually getting into preservation, fixing joints, doing new overlays, protecting those overlays. Those are the things we actually got into some preservation for about a 3 or 4 year span, and then it just got swept out from under us. So now we're back into recuperating. So is that good?